Hey, what's up, y'all? This is Michael Franti here, and welcome to this week's episode of the Stay Human podcast. I've got a guest with us who is just a super awesome visionary. He's a leader. He's got a proven track record of enacting systemic social change and developing the best practices in cannabis. As co-founder and chairperson of the board for the nonprofit Last Prisoner Project, he helps to fight criminal injustice and reimagine drug policy through intervention, advocacy, and awareness through the Last Prisoner Project. And they battle the harms of unjust policies for cannabis prisoners and helping them to get out. So please welcome to this week's episode of the Stay Human podcast, presented by Gibson Guitars. We love them so much. This is Andrew DeAngelo. How you doing, Andrew?
Hi, Michael. It's great to be with you and everybody today on Stay Human.
Yeah, man. We're stoked to have you. You know, this podcast is all about the premise that there's no one that you wouldn't love if you knew their story. So before we get into Last Prisoner Project and what you do with everything that you do with cannabis and you know, just the fight that you've been waging against the war on drugs and so many great things, I want to talk about you. So where did you grow up? Where are you from?
Well, I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. I was actually born in India. My parents were serving in the Peace Corps in India. So I got to be born in India, but we left India and came back when I was 2 years old. So I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. My family, I come from a broken family. So my parents split up when I was really, really young. So I kind of went back and forth in between two households until
How old were you when they split up?
5. I was about 4 or 5 years old.
Okay. So do you have memory of that moment, or was it just kind of like you always had mom in one house and dad in the other house? Or do you remember?
No, I remember very vividly the conversation that we're getting separated, you know, that conversation that your parents have with you. By that point, my brother had left home. We also had another brother who had died. So my brother Daniel died when I was 2. And whenever a child dies in a family, it can often put a lot of pressure on the marriage of the parents, and a huge percentage of marriages fail after a child passes. And our family was one of those families. And you know, a year or two after Daniel died, my parents split up. My brother left home, right? Yeah, I think my parents split up about 2 weeks after my brother left home. It was literally that quick a sequence. But I remember.
How old is he? Your older brother?
He's 9 years and 1 month older than me. So almost 10 years older than me. And so I was 4 or 5. So he was already, he left home young. My brother left home when he was 15 years old. So you can just imagine, this is like early 70s, the Vietnam War is still going on. That had a big impact on why my brother left home. And so the politics of what was going on at that time had a big impact on my family. And of course, things like death and divorce, you know. So that's how I grew up in that. And those were the circumstances that I had to sort of survive as a kid and figure out. And so when I was old enough to go to college, I wanted to go someplace kind of far away from home. And I went to, and that's where I fell in love with California. Yeah, I got to go to California with my dad when I was a little kid. And there was something about California that was different when I was a child. When I was like, I don't know, I was like 10 or 11 when we went out there for the first time. And I just fell in love with it as a child. And I just knew intuitively that I was going to go there. I was going to go there, and I was going to bring my family with me. And that was how we were going to do it. So all that eventually came to pass. So going to college in Southern California, I went to college when I was 17, 18. And that's sort of how I started to learn that the world was a little bit bigger place than
a little bit different than where you grew up. Yeah. So Andrew, you grew up in this household where there's 3 boys, you know, 2, 5, and like 14 or 15, and parents intact. And then boom, like almost overnight, you're just like the only kid and your parents are separated. You're going back and forth between the houses. So what was that like for you?
Well, of course, that's going to have a big impact on a child. The death of a child always just, and a divorce really has a huge impact on any family. Yeah. And in my case, there was an added element where it was not really an amicable divorce or separation. Mm-hmm. My parents were very angry with each other, and were lawyering up and fighting. Yeah. And my brother was 15, 16. He left home. My parents weren't expecting him to leave home until he was older than that, and weren't real thrilled with that, but also were pretty powerless to stop it. Someday you'll have to have Steve on your show, and you'll learn why. Once he puts his mind to something, there's no turning back. So the household, my mom, I was living with my mom. I went and saw my dad every other weekend, and my dad was working extra hard because now he had to support 3 households instead.
What kind of work did he do?
My dad worked for the federal government at a very high level, and he also later worked for Amtrak. What my dad did was he was a real estate developer, and he would work in the commerce department. So like if there was a community out in the country somewhere and they needed a fire station, my dad would figure out a way to get the government and some private people to figure out a way to pay for putting up a fire station. So that was the kind of thing he did economic development. And then any train station you go to in the United States, the big train stations with all the retail in them, whether it be Union Station, 30th Street Station in Philadelphia, those were all projects my dad led and visioned and executed. So that's he cool. Did big real estate projects, and that's what he did.
And your mom, what did she do?
Well, my mom was a housewife until all of these disasters occurred, and then she had to go back into the workforce. So she went back to school. She wanted to be a writer, editor, and she was a writer. Editor for a number of years, and unfortunately my mom, probably due to just the trauma of all of this, she developed a condition called narcolepsy when I was a teenager, and so she had to drop out of the workforce, and my brother and I essentially took care of my mom from the time I was a teenager until until she passed a few years ago.
Wow. So what was that like then, being a teenager? You've got a very complex family situation, and you're taking care of your mom, and in some ways you're kind of becoming the man of the house, and and then you're trying to navigate your way through school in the 70s, experience. Were you living in a place where there's a lot of counterculture, or how did you fit in with all this?
Yeah, well, we were living in the Washington D.C. area, and that's where my dad worked for the government. My mom was a housewife, and my brother had more of the burden of taking care of my mom financially when I was a teenager. So he was 10 years older. He was already in the cannabis trade, quite successful in the cannabis trade. And he was able to take care of my mom. And then when I finished my studies in school, I joined my brother, and then I was able to help take care of my mom. And that's how families that have disabled people in it have to work. You all have to pull your weight. You have to do it together. And I was blessed that I had an older brother who was able to take that burden for a little while so I could go to school. But it was stressful, of course, to have all that brokenness in the family and have people angry with each other. And there's all kinds of weird psychology when kids are taking care of their parents financially, and there's all kinds of weirdness between ex-parents that really don't like each other and very angry with each other. And I found myself in the middle of lots of disputes between my family members as a kid, and which made me an excellent diplomat. Gave me really good diplomatic skills that I still use to this day.
Yeah, you know? I can see that. You know, a lot of kids when, I got two questions. The first one is, do you remember the first time you experienced cannabis in your house? Like, did you see it, or did you try? Did your brother bring it to you, or was it a long time before, you know, that happened? And the second thing is, just, you know, most kids when they're teenagers and they start, you know, slinging a little pot on the side, if it's like, we're just, you know, I want to get a cool bike, I want to get an Xbox or whatever, you know, but your family was like trying to survive, use this as a means of, you know, of survival. So can you talk about those two things? When's the first time you became aware of cannabis?
Well, my brother started slinging weed when he was, I don't know, 13, 14, 15. And he never hid that from me. And even when the last year or two that he lived at home at my mom's house, I would, you know, he would gather with his friends when my mom wasn't home, or he would be in his own room or down in the basement. The house had some areas where parents didn't go, and they just let the kids be. And so he would smoke weed with his friends, and I would be hanging out with them. He never tried to hide it from me, was always honest with me. And then later, you know, I was an athlete as a kid. So how I coped with all of this was I played sports. And I got that from my father. My father was an athlete. So, but my brother would use my mom's house to do all kinds of different cannabis related things, whether it be activism, gatherings, dinners. Sometimes there'd be loads of weed in the basement that my brother would be handling, and I would be exposed to it as a kid, and I was growing up. So it was kind of part of the reality. It wasn't considered a bad thing, because I love my brother. He was good. It was, and he was, you know, he made it very clear to me when I was young. He gave me a talk about, you know, who was right and wrong about cannabis in the world.
What was that talk like? What did he say?
Well, you know, I was very young, and you know, I think I asked that he was smoking joints with his friends. You know, they were smoking weed, and it smelled differently than my parents' cigarettes. My parents smoked cigarettes. They both smoked cigarettes, so I knew what cigarettes were. And as a little kid, I asked, you know, what is this thing? And my brother told me it was a joint. It was, I don't know. He probably didn't use the word cannabis. I don't know what word he used. He didn't use marijuana, that's for sure. But he might have used ganja, or he might have used some other term, because we had just gotten back from India a couple of years before that. So, and he just explained to me, this is a plant, it's a natural herb. This is something we do, that adults do, and it's something that I trade in, and this is my job. And, you know, he explained it to me that way, in a pretty honest, matter-of-fact way. He didn't, you know, he mentioned in passing that it was illegal, and you know, the adults were wrong about that, but he didn't really dwell on that part of it. You know, did
the lie ever show up? Was
oh yeah, my brother got busted when I was 10 years old, and I had to go visit him in jail. He was in this little tiny jail in Virginia, and that was a formative experience for me.
Tell me about that.
Well, it was very interesting, because my parents were split up many years by this point. And they hadn't gotten divorced yet, and they were in court. They were in the divorce court proceedings, which take years. In those days, took years and years and years, especially when you're fighting. And the lawyers are just dragging it out, and they're invoicing you, and they're just, you know, everyone's just killing each other. And we had to drive there together. Both my parents had to drive me in the same car to the jail.
Oh boy.
So, I mean, you could cut that air with a knife. And then the added complication was you had to be 10 years old to visit someone in the jail, and I was only 9, but I was going to turn 10 in like 2 months. And so my parents we had to talk about, I had to lie. I had to lie about my age. They were going to lie about my age to the jailer so I could visit my brother. And this is after a lifetime up to that point of my parents raised us never to lie. And it was like the worst thing you could do was lie. Especially my mom. My mom was just, whoa. If you lied, she would go crazy on you. Yeah. I mean, she wasn't the kind of person that would spank you, but she would verbally abuse you. I mean, and she would banish you, and she would create lots of space and just make it hurt in every way other than a spanking. And it was, you don't lie. And so it was this very awkward thing where two parents that hate each other were in this 3-hour drive in a car with a little 9-year-old kid that they had to teach how to lie to a jailer
so they could see their brother got busted for weed.
Yeah. And so it was a very awkward ride, and then it was a very awkward visit.
What did you think when you saw him? Did you see him? You know, he was in the uniform, and did you actually go in to be?
I mean, the way they did it, for some reason, I had to go in and visit him by myself. And
was it an adult facility or juvenile facility?
No, it was an adult facility.
Okay.
It was a minimum security adult facility way out in the country of Virginia. And, you know, as soon as you walk in the visitor door, the big Confederate flag, man, right in front of your face. Oh, yeah. Big Confederate flag and then big American flag right next to each other. Boom. Yeah. Giant. I mean, giant, bigger than just huge. Maybe it's because I was a little kid. And then there's this big sheriff sitting behind, you know, this big tall thing. And you have to sit there and wait, and it's very uncomfortable. Everything's very uncomfortable. The furniture, everything, and it's loud and everything's clanking. And there's, you know, and they search you. They even searched me as a little kid. They search you. They pat you down. They search you. You go in. There's this little box, they lock you in, and there's the plexiglass and the telephone that you have to pick up and my brother comes in. He was wearing all white. In those days, they made you wear all white at this particular jail. But I distinctly remember, because he never wore white. And I was like, and everything was very orderly and routine, and you know, he was, you know, very clean, cut, because they made him cut his hair. He had long hair. They made him cut his hair, and we had a very limited amount of time. I think we had, I don't know, 2 minutes or something like that. It was very limited amount of time, and my brother, you know, he put on a very matter of fact, good-spirited face and interaction with me. I think he was trying to make sure I wasn't too scared or intimidated by the setting I was in, and just, you know, tried to put me at ease. And you know, he wrote me letters from jail. He was locked up about 6 months. You know, and you know, in those days, you got locked up. It was a very small amount of weed. He got busted in an airport in Virginia, Dulles Airport, and very small amount of weed. And you know, if he had not been a white male, he probably would have gotten locked up for 5 years instead of 6 months. You know, for sure. So that I credit. I didn't know it at the time. You don't know it when you're a kid. You know, when you're a kid, you're just trying to get through the next thing your parents drag you to. So, and this was like a really hard thing to get through. And so, but years later, now as I look back on it, it was a radicalization event for me. I mean,
So how did this, you know, take you to the next steps in your life? Like when you got through high school, or did you get into activism in high school or in college, or at what point did this really start to kick in for you, that you're making these connections? Like, man, there's cannabis. My brother was a good guy, and he was growing, you know, he was selling this stuff, and he was doing it to support our family and get, you know, and you see your mom going through everything she's going through. And then you get out into the real world, and you're starting to see, like, wow, this war on drugs is like destroying our country over like this plant. So at what point was that wake up occurring for you?
Well, I was an athlete, like I mentioned. That's how I coped with a hard childhood. But then in high school, I got hurt, and I couldn't. I wanted to be a professional athlete. I go all in on everything I do. I'm a dreamer, and I always swing for the fences. So I wanted to be a professional athlete, and I got hurt, and it was very clear the injury was such that that dream was gone. So it was a very young age that to have that first dream die on you, whether it's with something out of your control or whether you just didn't have what it takes to be a professional athlete. There's only a few people in the world that get to do that. And even if I hadn't gotten hurt, I did not have the athletic talent to be a professional athlete. So my brother saw that I was in a lot of pain, and I was at my mom's house one day, and my brother, as he had done for a long time, a couple years prior to that, he handed me a joint that he was smoking and said, "You want to try this? It might make you feel better." And after all these years of seeing my brother in the trade and seeing him smoke joints and seeing him be with people and seeing the effects that cannabis had on all that, there was a voice inside me that said, yes. So I took the joint and smoked it with him. And immediately I was transformed into a cannabis activist and heavy consumer and advocate and dealer and trader and all the rest of it. By the next morning, my brother gave me my first, quarter pound of weed to break down and sell to my friends in high school by the next morning of that first joint. That's how quickly. And of course, the seeds of all that, as you can imagine from the story I've already told you about my childhood, that it was inevitable that would happen to me, and thank goddess, I guess you could say, that it did, and I'm just very lucky that I had such a guide like Steve into the world of cannabis, and not. Most people don't, most people, they go to college and somebody hands them a joint at a party and all of a sudden they're maybe way too high or not high enough or in the wrong setting or whatever it might be. No one's there to say, hey, this is what this is. And this is the history of it. And this is what you need to know. And this is what's good and what's not.
I want to talk about Last Prisoner Project. And I know we're kind of like jumping really far ahead, but we can kind of fill in some of the gaps in between. But so much of what you described, it really informs what you do today with the Last Prisoner Project. How medicine or cannabis is a medicine, how cannabis is a means of economic ends for some people, how there's a lot of injustice in the prison system and the judicial system in terms of sentencing and mandatory minimum sentencing, differences of sentencing between black and white offenders. And then also we're living in this time where there's legalization in one block and the next block you're down for 25 years still, and we still have people who are in prison on, 40, 50, 60-year sentences in some states. And yet there are people in the next, within 100 miles who are making millions of dollars, perhaps billions of dollars off of legalized cannabis. So let's talk a little bit and get into Last Prisoner Project, and maybe you can fill in some of the gaps of how you got to this point. But I really want people to hear what the work is that you're doing right now.
Sure. Last Prisoner Project is my favorite thing to talk about these days. It's a nonprofit organization. Everyone can check it out at lastprisonerproject.org. We've been around about 2 years. 2 years ago, Steve and I and some other folks co-founded Last Prisoner Project. And, as you can imagine from that first experience visiting my brother as a child, over and over again, people in our circle and our community got busted, went to jail. Even recently, just a few years ago, a friend of ours got busted and went to jail. And one day my brother got a phone call from him from prison, and my brother happened to be in a big boardroom with a whole bunch of super wealthy, super privileged people who were talking about creating not $1 million, but $1 billion cannabis companies, basically growing, manufacturing, and transporting and distributing cannabis. Like our friend Chuck, who was calling my brother on the phone from prison, 14 pounds he got busted with. And it just struck my brother that something was very wrong, and the vision for Last Prisoner Project hit him like a thunderbolt. But even when we had our dispensary Harborside, we had a program where people could write letters to prisoners and get a free gram of medicine in exchange for that. And so we've always had, and we've both been locked up at various times in our lives, and certainly had people we deeply care about get locked up and are locked up. So it was natural for us to start the Last Prisoner Project. We finally had the time and the bandwidth and the resources and the relationships and everything else to do it a couple of years ago. And we're very blessed. We have an incredible executive director, incredible staff. Our reentry program is run by former prisoners. So we hire our own constituents once we get them out of prison. Our mission is to get cannabis prisoners out of prison. We don't do any other types of prisoners. We just do cannabis prisoners.
Do you do it one-on-one with their cases, or do you do it? Are you trying to do, like class action style things? Or is it just people contact you and say, hey, I need help getting out. I'm in for a long bid. And how do you identify them, and how do you
it's really
work on?
We try to do both. What we really want to do is when a state or a municipality passes a legalization law, that they will also pass a retroactive expungement and release law, so that anybody that's locked up and anybody that has this on their record, the day after the law passes, they get out and the record gets expunged. We haven't been able to pass any of those yet. Unfortunately, but we want to. Expungement we have been able to do, but not release. So expungement, we had a mass expungement program in Colorado that did several thousand people at once. We did one in Illinois. When I say we, it's not just Last Prisoner Project. There are a whole bunch of activist organizations. There's the Can Do expungement effort. There's the Weldon Project, Cage Free Cannabis. So many groups, too many to mention. We all are really important. We all deserve your listeners' support.
Mm-hmm.
So then we have to do it one at a time. If we can't get a mass release or expungement, and that takes many hours of legal work. It usually involves a governor or a president issuing a pardon or a commutation. And to get those folks to do that is enormously difficult and takes many thousands of legal hours to do. And we have a lot of lawyers that work pro bono. Some of our operating budget goes to other lawyers to help with that. We try to get most of our operating budget into the hands of the actual constituents and prisoners. I think we do a really good job with that. And we also do reentry. So once we get people out, we try to reenter people. And
are they able to get jobs in the cannabis industry? Are you able to put former prisoners to work?
Now sometimes we have to be creative, and they can't actually touch the plant because they're on some kind of supervised release.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't like supervised release. It really frustrates me because it's like, hold on, this person should have never been locked up in the first place, and now you're going to give them supervised release. And it's just, it makes you pull your hair out. But in any case, they can't touch the plant in that case sometimes, and we have to get them a job doing something else. Maybe they're in marketing, or maybe they're in accounting, or something that's not directly touching the plant. We have to get that approved by whoever is supervising the release. But and once everybody signs off on it, then yes, they can work in the cannabis industry, and many want to work in the cannabis industry. And we also are trying to launch a training program so folks can get out and then they go into our training program for free, and maybe they even earn a little stipend or something doing it, and then they have more skills and they can go get hired in the cannabis industry. So
the cannabis industry has just had like a massive explosion of growth, and there's so many people who are like cannabis entrepreneurs, and how can I get in this thing, and how can I make these millions of dollars? How has it been when you're working or talking to or meeting at a conference with other people who are cannabis entrepreneurs, and you talk to them about this? Is this something that they're keen to work on, or is the general attitude, we're just here to make money and screw whoever is still locked up, or is there a good feeling, or do you feel that cannabis entrepreneurs have a moral obligation, if they're making money off this, to help those who have been incriminated through the America's war on drugs?
Oh, absolutely. I 100% believe, my brother and I in Last Prisoner Project, we 100% believe there is a moral obligation. I have a moral obligation. I'm my street cred's pretty good. But I have a moral obligation to work on this. And so does everybody in our industry. It doesn't matter if you're giant or small or rich or grinding it out. There's always a way to help, and we have a moral obligation to do this. We cannot sit back and not work on this. The prohibition is 100 years old. It's about a century. Cannabis prohibition has happened at the state level, at the federal level, a little less than that, but it's a long time, and it's done a lot of damage to specific communities, particularly communities of color. It's just been devastating, and we can't be an industry without getting everybody out of jail and getting them integrated into the industry, and hopefully creating wealth and ownership for these communities that have been affected by this in serious ways. I want to see massive success. The faces of our industry that have massive success be people of color, and be queer people, and women, and small people you never heard of right now. That's the promise of the legalization in the cannabis industry. My brother's talking about this a lot right now, and he's giving a talk at South by Southwest, I think next week, on this. But it's not about building a new industry. It's about building a new kind of industry. We have that opportunity. We can empower with ownership these communities that haven't had it in any industry, had it in any industry. And we can both right the wrongs of the past, lead the charge in that, set the example for all the other industries to do the same, because it shouldn't just be the cannabis industry that's talking about this. It should not just be our industry that's talking about this. Shouldn't there be a lot of industries that are talking about this?
Absolutely. I wanted to bring that up just to shift gears a little bit here. As a musician, and also this podcast is sponsored by Gibson Guitars, and you think of the history of rock and roll music and popular music and reggae and so many forms of music that have had cannabis be such a big part of the history and the legacy and the creativity and the culture and the fans and the concerts and like every single aspect of it. What can the music world do to help?
Well, the music world is actually one of Last Prisoner Project's biggest supporters. So we have a bunch of huge musicians on our advisory board, like Damian Marley and Melissa Etheridge and folks from Revolution. Revolution is probably the band that supported us the most. They're about to do some virtual concerts that support Last Prisoner Project. So Eric Rachmani is also on our advisory board. And so we welcome as many folks from the music community to come in and help and join our advisory board, or be one of our partners of freedom. It's all on our website, but any company, any organization, any band, any group, if you've got a record, if you're on the road, if you're selling swag and you want to help support LPP with a small or maybe more than small portion of that revenue, we'd love to have you. And so that's one thing the music community can do. And we have a lot of musicians now coming into the cannabis industry that are, most of those deals are licensing deals. But it's really helping create new mythologies and pop culture for cannabis, is having these musical icons, lend their likeness to brands and help create trust with the world and cannabis. I always want that to be done in a good way. Folks can do that in a way that's not so good, but that's not just true with cannabis. That's true when celebrities or musicians lend their name and likeness to anything, so and I just like you are, we're so looking forward to being able to gather again and listen to music again and play music again. And yes, I'm hearing the end of summer, maybe the fall. And when that happens, then we'll be able to do events together. We want to get some of our prisoners that we've gotten out of prison on the road. They're wonderful speakers. We're getting media training to them. And some of them are just compelling, talented, amazing human beings that now want to be activists. And we want to put them on the road. We'd love to hook them up with some bands and musicians and tours. And when that time comes, when the great emergence happens, we hope to integrate even more with the music community. The music community is super important in the cannabis movement. It always has been. If you're listeners and have not heard of the film Grass is Greener by Fab Five Freddy, which tells the history of cannabis prohibition and sort of from a musical bent, from a lot of musicians, a lot of music history in that as well, and cannabis history that everybody should know. And if anybody says, hey, how is weed made illegal? Show them The Grass is Greener on Netflix, and then that's pretty much the definitive
historical document on it.
Yeah, that's
prohibition.
The definitive document on it. So I think it's an incredibly important community to carry the message of social justice and cannabis justice.
Awesome. Hey, Andrew, I got one last question for you. And that is the same question we ask everybody on the show, which is, how do you stay human? Like, what does it mean to you to be human? And then how do you hold on to that in this world that is so, so crazy?
Right. Well, it's a great question that all of us should ask ourselves every day, because this world is not naturally human in many respects. It's certainly not the way we evolved. Is sort of the way we live now is much different than the way we naturally evolved as animals on this planet. So a better question might be, what do I not do to stay human? I'm one of these people that I have a very diverse and long self-care list and ways that we have to take care of ourselves in the alternative community and the creative community and the cannabis community. So I do my meditation, my exercise, my prayers. And I eat well. I read books. I expand my knowledge. I work in the garden. I create, I try to do creative work. I try to have a big community of friends that are important to me, that I prioritize. All those things I think are critical, that practices to stay human, because our work that we do, that you do as a musician, you know, I just remember seeing you in the Disposable Years. I was just listening to Spare Ass Annie, actually, before this podcast, because it's one of my favorite albums ever. But you know, our work is stressful. It's hard. It's risky. You take a creative risk. You cut an album like Spare Ass Annie, you know, and
with
you're
William
like,
Burroughs, you know.
woo, you put it out there to the world and you're like, oh my God, is it gonna be okay?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with activism, and it's the same, these are risky, hard endeavors that we're all doing. So we have to take care of ourselves and be compassionate. I also mention these things because I need to learn them. As much as I try to illuminate others about this, I also learn it myself. I need to learn it myself. I move too fast. I have too much going on often. I have terrible problems with sleep and insomnia because my mind is very active. I'm aroused all the time. I'm worried. I'm always worried. You know, the road less traveled is one that is filled with blood, sweat, and tears. So make sure you're breathing, everybody.
Awesome. Hey, Andrew, thanks a lot, man. How can folks learn about Last Prisoner Project? Where are you guys located?
LastPrisonerProject.org. Our website is really informative. We have terrific groups helping us with that. Everybody chips in, works pro bono. We have a few contractors working on it too, I should say, actually, but it's a real team effort. So lastprisonerproject.org, and people can reach me at andrewdeangelo.com.
Awesome. Hey, we've been talking with andrewdeangelo.com. Hey, we've been talking with Andrew DeAngelo, and it's been really great to have you on the show, and just, you know, opening people's minds, hearts, eyes open up to what's happening with cannabis. We see legalization happening in all the states, but we've got to make sure that no one is left behind in this war on drugs. We've got to get everybody out until the last prisoner is set free. And I know you're committed to that. So thanks for doing that. That's been Andrew DeAngelo on the Stay Human podcast, presented by Gibson Guitars.
Thank you.